Não tem mais o que fazer. Querer dormir.
Hello. All good? Can everyone hear me? Maybe there's a bit of feedback. Should I get started then? Okay. All right, everybody, so we're gonna get started. My name is 𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗲. I'm one of the co-organizers here at ProductTank. I'm just gonna go before David and Luis just to give you an introduction. We're gonna start with the agenda for today. So we're gonna start with a brief introduction on what ProductTank is, especially for those of you that would be here for the first time. Then we're gonna hear from our sponsor, Infraspeak, just a little bit about who they are, what they do, and all that good stuff. Then finally, I'll hand it over to David and then Luis to hear about product across cultures and within an organization. And then finally, what everyone is also hoping for, networking time over snacks and drinks, and you'll have time to get to know everyone and chit-chat for a little bit. So without further ado, ProductTank is a Mind the Product initiative, and our mission is to foster collaboration and growth within local product management communities to drive innovation and excellence. We are a global initiative. We're all over the world, different cities, different countries. So if you're traveling or moving abroad and you don't have anything to do, check out your local ProductTank community. Then one of 2 QR codes at the night, free certifications. You get a badge to show off on LinkedIn, which we all love. There's some cool topics on product-led strategy, analytics, AI. I've done one pretty interesting, and I wasn't a co-organizer then, so unbiased opinion. So yeah, take some time to take some photos. You can also reach out afterwards for the link. Then, if you want to speak to us, speak at an event, be a sponsor, just share some feedback on different formats you would like to see, reach us out through this QR code. And then now a word from our sponsor, specifically 𝗬𝗲𝗶𝗲𝗍𝗲, Director of Product at Infraspeak.
Hello. So I'm João, the Director of Product here at Infraspeak. For the ones that don't know us, Infraspeak is a facility management software. We work with a huge variety of customers, from facility management companies to retail, hospitality, public sector, and so on. We aim to streamline collaboration and communication and bring flexibility to our customers' maintenance operation. And our main goal is to make everyone work as one. So in a facility, you have the owner, the maintenance team, the employees, the end users. So we want everyone to be able to communicate, to make everything work in a way that they don't have to worry about it every day. We are very happy to partner with Mind the Product and host this event. We are a firm believer in community and growing together, and I already did a couple of the courses, and I can say unbiased, they are good. So enjoy the event and feel free to reach out during the network to talk a little bit, exchange some ideas, and have fun.
All right, and now before David, just a sneak peek at our future event. We're gonna have 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗲 with Principles of a Strong Product Culture. He's an author and founder and consultant, and we're gonna have a giveaway of his books. So do make sure that you RSVP soon. We're gonna have that available in the next days, so do keep in mind. And now, without further ado, I hand it over to David with his presentation on managing across cultures. Thank you.
Check. All good? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me at this event. I've been a member of ProductTank Porto pretty much since it came back, and it's been a real pleasure to be in the group, and I'm thankful to be able to be up here presenting today about managing across cultures. So I will be talking about my experience working in 5 different countries. Before getting into that, I would like to hear a little bit about everyone here today. If you could raise your hand if you've ever been interested in working abroad before. Let's just start there. Okay, so we have a couple. Now please keep your hand up if you've worked abroad in at least 1 country. Ooh, okay, we have a couple. 2? Still? 3? Okay. 4? 5? 6? What do we got? Have you worked abroad before? How many countries? How many countries? 3? Okay, that's pretty good. All right, well, thank you so much for giving me that feedback there. So this has been my journey abroad so far. So I started in product 12 years ago. Need to speak louder? Okay, thanks for that. So over the last 12 years, I've been working as a PM in 5 different countries. So I started my career in the US, worked in Beijing for Q4 of 2013, so a couple months there. Then moved to Tokyo for 2 years, Berlin for 3 years, and now I've been here in Porto since 2019, so about 5.5 years. So I've really felt the cultural differences between these countries when I'm communicating and managing across teams, very diverse teams, not just locally, but of course, teams that are across the world as well. So let me walk you through my journey to help you understand the importance of taking culture into account when you're working with diverse teams globally. So instead of just relying on my own experience, which of course I have a lot of stories that I can share, but I also would like to bring some academic rigor into my talk today by referring to this book called The Culture Map. So I'd recommend checking it out, reading it if you haven't, but it really helps to identify the differences in 8 different aspects between cultures across the world. So she does a great job, Erin Meyer, the author, does a great job at really comparing and contrasting cultures. And I found her insights to be really relevant to my experiences abroad. So I'll also be bringing her insights into this presentation today. So just to talk a little bit about the culture map and the dimensions that she compares across. So there's communicating, which is basically you have low context cultures where things are very direct and people say exactly what they mean, versus high context cultures where it's very nuanced and you have to understand a lot of the cultural differences and small details to be able to get the message. Then you have evaluating, so you have more direct negative feedback and really telling people, I don't like what you're doing, or we should go and do it this way, versus being more indirect. And so we'll talk about some of those differences experiences as well. Then there's leading, so you have more of the egalitarian approach where everyone's equal and it's more, you can really share your idea with the CEO down to the most junior person, compared to a very hierarchical structure where of course the boss is the boss and everybody else kind of follows suit. In terms of deciding, you have a more consensual approach where everyone sort of has to agree on the path forward before you can take the next step, versus a more top-down approach where you've got the boss saying we need to do this, and then everyone again kind of follows suit. You have a trusting sort of aspect to the culture, so it's more task-based, so that could be that it's only for that specific task where you need to have a relationship. You might have a brand new supplier that you've never worked with, and you can have that relationship, but it might only last a short period of time, versus a more relationship-based approach where you need to have those strong relationships in place for a long time and make use of those when picking suppliers, for example. Another aspect is how much there is more confrontational versus avoiding confrontation culture in terms of the disagreements, so how open people are to confronting one another. And then you have scheduling, so it's a more linear time, meaning 5 o'clock is 5 o'clock, versus a more flexible time where 5 o'clock could mean anything from 5 to 5:30 or 6 o'clock. And then persuading, so this is an area where it's either you talk about the principles that underlie the decisions versus the applications first, and you go straight into the conclusions, what should we do based on this information. So these are the 8 different dimensions that we'll be talking about in this presentation from the Culture Map book. And I'll go ahead and jump into my experience. So I started my career in San Francisco 12 years ago in product, and I worked at a company called 𝗽𝗲𝗲𝗸 that was doing web and mobile free-to-play games. So that was really my starting point. So the US is, of course, where I grew up. I was relatively new to San Francisco. But that was my baseline, so you can think about that as my experience that I compared a lot of the other countries I worked in to. So what was important with that are these four areas. So in particular, there was a much more low context communication. You really say what you mean. You say it directly without a lot of nuance. Speak directly. So Erin Meyer says in her book that this was really developed in the US this way because people came from all over the world. So the clearest way to get your point across was to be direct about it and not have that high context communication. Next was a really egalitarian approach to working in the work environment. The people had the authority to make a decision. They didn't necessarily have to, worry about talking to the boss. It was like very open offices, right? So bosses are relatively approachable. And then it's also a very task-based society, right? Especially in the work environment where you can do business with people one day and the next day you're cutting the contact or cutting the relationship. And that's a lot less loyalty, but a lot easier to maybe start things up. And then you have an applications-first approach, which is move fast and break things. I think a lot of us here have probably heard about that. I found that to be true in San Francisco. This was not my office, but the vibe that I was getting there, which was, dress how you want. Everyone's, again, like an egalitarian approach, open office, everyone's working together, move fast and break things. And for me, it was a very fly by the seat of my pants experience. I started in the job my first time as a product manager coming out of working in investment banking, and suddenly 3 months into the job, I was leading a team of 10 people. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was doing the best I could with the information I had. I had one meeting with my boss let's say I had the chance to have a meeting for 30 minutes with my boss every week if I wanted to, but it was up to me to ask for it, and of course I didn't quite know if I should do that or not, and I was otherwise just told to test things, break things. It was going to be fine. And I asked for feedback at one point and was told that I would hear about it if I was doing poorly. I said, okay, great. Let me just see what I can break here and get away with. So what was really interesting about that job was about 8 months in, I had the opportunity to move to Beijing. It was either Vancouver or Beijing. I said, get me out of San Francisco. I can't wait to get abroad. That was my big goal. So my next stop was Beijing, and I worked there for 3 months with the product team and working on the ground with the local team as well. So as you can see, Chinese culture is completely different from anything I'd experienced in the United States. In fact, couldn't probably be much more different. So what was really important in my experience there, and again, I have a relatively shorter experience there, so I can only see some aspects of it, but it was really the high context communication, so very nuanced, not to mention, of course, Chinese versus English, but then getting into the specifics of the communication. And then ultimately building deep relationships was really important. So it was very relationship based. And you might wonder, well, how did I tackle that? It was really by drinking a lot of alcohol and having a lot of dumplings. So it was a lot of team outings. It was a lot of good times. Yeah, hard mornings, hard nights and hard mornings. But it was a lot of fun. But ultimately, it was really important to be able to build the relationships with the team that way. It was a relatively shorter period of time, but had to get in there and make as much impact as I could. And that was the way to do it. So after a couple months, moved back to San Francisco, beginning of January 2014, thought everything was going great. A couple weeks later, the head of product quits. Then there were rumblings of restructuring, and suddenly I was out of a job. So me and both of the two bosses above me got laid off in February on the same day. And I was told to leave the office within 30 minutes with my box of stuff, which might be surprising to a European crowd, but this is really how it was. And as we said, a very direct American style in terms of having that task-based approach. There was not a lot of loyalty, and that's what happened. But I decided, okay, I'm not going to let one company decide if I live abroad, so let me keep that dream alive. I traveled around Europe, so I did about a 2-month trip into, I think it was like 19 cities, so I tried to see as much as I could of Europe. And while I was doing that, I wanted to find out if I could get back to China, because I had just been there, or get to my goal country, ultimately, which was Japan. I'd been studying Japanese since I was 12 years old, and I managed to get that job. So I headed to Tokyo a few months later. I got a job at ASICS, or ASICS, depending on where you're from. It's a global sportswear company, a Japanese company. And I can tell you honestly that once I arrived, it was the biggest goal of my life completed. And I've had other goals since then, but this one was way up there. So again, quite different from Chinese culture, but very different from American culture. This was, I had a big culture shock moving to Japan. I guess most people do, but I'd actually spent years studying Japanese and Japanese culture, so it was somehow surprising to me that I still had this much culture shock. What I found to be particularly challenging about working in Japan were these areas. So very high context communication. So there's a saying in Japanese, kuki o yomu, which basically means to read the air, essentially meaning they don't necessarily tell you things directly. You have to pick up the signs, pick up, like, read the air to be able to understand what they actually wanted of you. So even if you speak Japanese, this is very hard to do. Then there was the indirect negative feedback issue. So I couldn't really say what I wanted to say. I had to kind of, especially as a product manager, this is very hard, where you have to say, I think maybe we could possibly do it this way. I don't know, what do you think? As opposed to saying, I think that we should do it this way, which is a way that I frankly prefer to work. So I found that challenging to be able to give feedback and direction. It's also very consensual in terms of the way that people decide things. So it really goes up the chain. Everyone has to sort of agree. It moves from bottom up in some cases for getting approval, and every layer has to agree to it. Or you have, of course, more of a, you can have it where the boss decides something and then basically everyone follows as well. And then avoids confrontation. I found this situation where, as you may have heard or experienced if you've been in Japan, people don't necessarily want to say no. So they don't really want to confront you. It tends to be a more, at least outwardly, a very polite society. So I find it hard to have people say that they agreed to something, or let's say they didn't disagree, and then I would check in a few months later, a few weeks later, and nothing had happened. But they didn't really want to say no, so yeah, that can be hard to figure out. So just to give some examples during my time there of how I experienced these challenges, there was tons of bureaucracy in Japan. I guess that's true in a lot of countries, but there was a lot of paper documents that needed physical stamps, you can see here. And the documents were typically not translated. So even speaking Japanese, I definitely needed a lot of help from people in the office with this. So one of the first things I had to do was get approval on a marketing budget. And the manager that was in my office had left the company, so the one that I needed to talk to was in Kobe, where the headquarters was. And he ended up traveling to our office, or I had to go there. I had to send the documents that were fully written out in Japanese, physically, paper version, from person to person to person to get this physical stamp in order to get the final approval. Took a very long time, extremely inefficient, not a lot of fun. And then just to say, there's a lot of cultural elements as well, right? So you have to learn the ways to bow, the ways to figure out who's supposed to sit around the table at a business meeting. These are just a couple of examples, but these are the types of challenges that I found to actually be able to be an effective product manager in Japan, but you ultimately have to learn these things in order to kind of grease the wheels and make sure that you're doing things in a way that works in the culture. So despite years of studying the language, in fact, what they say is to get to the JLPT N1, which is like the C2 level exams in Europe, which I did manage to pass before I left there, it takes what they say is 3,900 plus study hours. So if you do that 1 hour of study per day, every single day, that's more than 10 years. So I had truly done much more than that even. But more than 10 years of studying Japanese, passing this exam. I applied to 50 companies in Japan, couldn't find the next one when I found out that ASICS was probably not going to continue, or at least in the way I wanted it to. I decided, you know what, maybe it's time to look elsewhere. So I started thinking back to my trip in Europe. I love how much I loved going to Berlin, and that's ultimately where I landed. So I worked for 2 German companies there with about 200, 300 people, and they both had something around 50 nationalities, so very diverse multicultural environments. And I also worked for one smaller company, Deca Games, that was founded by one of the Americans that was working at 𝗬𝗲𝗸𝗀, the first company I worked for in San. So as you can see, German culture is also very different from what I'd grown used to in Japan. So, Japan, I kind of thought, well, I had that experience, I did that, I did China as well, maybe, I can kind of move anywhere, right? Culture is important, but you can make it work. Well, actually, I realized that I underestimated the cultural differences, and even across, coming from the US, not only that, but Japan, Germany. So what I found was basically I went from polite Japan to a country where people are pretty confrontational, or they can be, especially in Berlin, and they can also be very open with direct negative feedback. So I found out very quickly that I had to really grow some thicker skin to be able to survive in Berlin. But once I did that, things went more smooth. You might expect that Germany would be quite different from Japan, but on the other hand, it's also very different from the US. So what I found there was that it was a lot more hierarchical, it was more consensual in terms of decision making, and a principles first approach as opposed to applications first made it much harder to experiment and to be successful as a product manager in Germany. So everything had to be approved and thought through, lots and lots of meetings, alignments with different departments, different offices. And so it was really just like everyone had to get on the same page, a lot of like over communicating, tons of meetings. And actually soon after joining one of the companies I worked for in Berlin, I basically went there to work for this great boss. I was really excited to work for him. And 2 months after I joined, he was fired from the company unceremoniously, basically because he hadn't made the progress that they wanted him to make, as far as I understood, which I had been in those meetings with him. I saw him trying to make that progress, but I think culturally, of course it can be a company-specific issue as well, but culturally I could see the challenges of trying to make it. It's also a big focus, I think, in German culture for making plans for plan A. What if that doesn't work? You have to have plan B, C, D, all the way to Z, and make sure that you really have everything in place and figured out before you're able to move forward with a new initiative. So I just found that there was a lot of analyzing data, a lot of making extra plans, really fully written out documents, and making sure that you talk about how you got the data that you got, thorough analysis of the data before you actually jump into it. So after a couple of jobs in Berlin, while I had a good time there, I thought, let me go somewhere warmer, and ended up in Porto. So I'm sure you're all familiar with working here, but it's been an interesting journey for me. So I started at Internations, which is part of New Work, a division there that they had an office here in Porto. So it was a new company, even though it was a German company for me here in Porto. Then I worked for myself for a couple of years, but now I work at a digital product studio called Significa, based here in Porto. Been there for over a year. So Portuguese culture, I also found to be quite different from German culture, and also proven by this, this analysis here. The biggest adjustments that I personally have had to make, and honestly I'm still making them, is to deal with essentially a more focus on building deeper relationships, so a more relationship-based approach, as well as getting used to a more relaxed view towards time. You might be familiar with that. No? Have you ever heard of that? So while it was interesting for me because actually the US, Germany, and Japan, although I didn't get into it in those slides, all had a preference towards linear time. So I was much more used to something at 5 starts at 5 or whatever the time is. Here I've had to adjust to a bit more flexible approach to time. So one thing that shocked me was how people really care about their relationships with other people. And I don't mean that specifically as shocking, but the way that it manifests itself. So at least what I'm seeing at Significa, for example, is people going around the office every morning, taking a long time, shaking everyone's hand, saying bon dia, having a conversation, hanging out near the coffee machine, doing the whole thing. And I love it, but I'm also like amazed by how in-depth it is. And there's many steps to the process. Having snacks together, having lunch together. So there's also a Slack channel that we have at the company where anyone who wants to just says bon dia in the morning. That's basically it. So for me, this is like a different level. I didn't see that in Japan, okay? So this is different. This is a different level. And then at the same time, I think there's much more of a relaxed approach to time, as I said, and to building relationships. So longer lunch times, more hanging out. And I've also found the business meetings tend to go a lot longer than I prefer. So I kind of like a meeting that's, okay, we discussed everything in 15 minutes. You might have an hour slot, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, then we're good. But I find that those meetings tend to take the full hour, if not longer. A lot of people have a lot of things to say, which is great, but not the most efficient sometimes, in my opinion. But I'm still getting used to it. So this is my journey so far. Hopefully some more countries to come in the future. But this is really the point here. So why culture is important? Because of this. So to me, when I saw this, it really struck me because it really illustrates the differences that I've experienced and that we can all experience as we work with global teams. So it can be with whether it's in our own company, between bosses, the employees, our teams. It could be our suppliers or our vendors. It could be our partners. really we need to take a lot more of the culture into account when we're making our choices about how we're communicating. I think we really tend to underestimate the cultural differences, and we say things like we've always said them and we expect the same things to happen, but that can be even within a common group of people. Think about your own family, for example. You come from the same culture, the same language, the same upbringing, the same expectations, and yet there's so many miscommunications, right? And of course, the work is a different environment, but I really think it can just grow from there, especially if you take other cultures into account. So from all of this, I do have a couple of recommendations I'll leave you with, and then we'll get to the next presentation. But what I would say is, first and foremost, that it is better to listen first and then act. So what I found is, especially moving from culture to culture, is it's better, as an American, it can be almost instinctual to just go in and say, I think we should do it this way, or like come in strong. But I found it to be better to take a step back, to listen first before opening my mouth and giving an opinion. So I'm not perfect at that. I'm still working on it, but I think that's a good way to do it. If you think about the Japanese business table, it's better not just to open the door and sit wherever you want, but wait and see what everybody else does, and hopefully get some help from a local team member. Next, I'd say that you should probably try to give the benefit of the doubt to people when there's a miscommunication, especially because culture might be a part of it. So don't assume the worst from your colleagues. It might be related to the culture. So give them the benefit of the doubt and have a conversation with them. And to that extent, be curious about it. So go in not thinking, well, why'd you do that? That was wrong, that was terrible, but more saying, you tell me a little bit about your thought process. Why did you make that decision? I would think about perhaps doing it this way. What do you think? And having these types of open conversations with being curious. I would also say, for the reasons I mentioned about having so many cultures, for example, in the United States, is opt toward being direct, just instead of hiding things or being indirect, especially if you're working on multicultural teams, so that you can ideally get the point across in a way that everyone understands. Of course, sometimes you need to be a bit less direct. And then also discover your own cultural blind spots. So take a curious look at yourself as well and think, maybe I could communicate this in a better way, trying to understand your partners, the people that you work with, and so forth, and be able to communicate in a way that best works for them. So those are my recommendations. If you want, you can follow me or add me on LinkedIn here. But thank you so much to ProductTank Porto for having me for this wonderful event. Thank you to Infraspeak. And I'm more than happy to take any questions once we get to the Q&A part at the end of the presentation. But thank you so much. I guess I should say, next up we have Luis.
Thank you.
You want to grab that?
Should I put it?
Yeah, you got it? I don't know, I can help
I'll
you.
try. Where's 𝗍𝗫 when we need her? She's not here. Is it good? All right, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for joining us today, and to the invitation for me to share this stage with you guys. My name is Luis Pereira. I'm a lead product manager at Infraspeak. And today I'm going to share a little bit about the journey that we did within our product and engineering departments, how we're involved in terms of process, and how that also reflected in the culture that we have today. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit of the context. What is Infraspeak? How do we operate in here? So, as João already told you, we're a platform to manage facility maintenance, which is anything and everything that the building can have. So there's a lot of invisible work that happens when you use a hospital, an hotel, a shopping center, whatever it is. And the people that do this are like invisible and overloaded and with a lot of headaches. And so these are some of the things that we help them manage on their day-to-day. And we're pretty good at it. So this means connecting a lot of different stakeholders. So you have your internal team. As a manager, you have your team. You have your suppliers that help you execute the problems that appear. And also you have your customers. So there's a big network of people to be managed. All of this takes time. So we try to make it a little bit better. We also work on our web product. We have mobile apps, so we work across platforms. We're also API first, so we do a lot of different things, and this also ends up being a lot of different apps, different integrations, a lot of data coming from different sources, and as you can see, our product is pretty massive to manage. Okay, so it's been 10 years, I think 10 years a week ago or 2, and you can see that we're already at the, let's say, a late stage of product development. The way that we organize our teams, so we operate in what we call verticals, business verticals. We have company objectives, and our technical teams are organized around these objectives. So we have our product manager, our designers, our engineering manager, and the engineering squads and quality engineers. For example, this is the fleet, and this is our fleet. So I'm one product manager, Joan is another, Andrea, thank you for coming today. We have Ricardo from our engineering team, the squads, and Marta. And that's it. These are the people that you have to support the business that is booming and everything, everyone needs everything, right? And sometimes for sales, any salespeople here? No, nobody's perfect, okay, that's okay. But for sales and for the rest of the company, this team sometimes feels like the end of the solitary game, right? You're like a bazillion people, there's a lot of hands, there's a lot of topics that you can handle. But no, you're just maybe 15 people if you're lucky, trying to support already a giant product and trying also to add new functionalities to it. You like the solitaire? I'll do it again for you. Yeah. Well, move it ahead. And the main thing that we come across is that the customer problems are infinite, right? We have a endless backlog of things that we can do, but the resources are very limited. And so we end up many times looking into this triangle, right? You probably do this in your work. So you either do things to a certain scope on a certain time, but sacrifice on the quality, or you do quality on time, but you do less, or you do quality on time, but you do, sorry, I missed it. I do scope on time, well, whatever, you know. And normally in the pure Scrum, the traditional one, this is what you will do. We're gonna build something. We don't care what it is, we're just gonna build something, we're gonna take 2 weeks and reassess. And so we're gonna do something, a scope, normally a pretty basic one. We're gonna do it in 2 weeks, so we have a closed amount of time, whatever quality it is. So if I throw it away in 4 weeks, that's fine. If I keep it for 2 years, I'll need to figure out the technical debt, whatever, I don't care. But how this probably evolves in the next few years if your product is successful. How many of you work in engineering teams of more than 50 people? So Infraspeak does. As you grow in your journey as a product, you'll probably do something like this, right? Okay, let's build this scope, but let's try not to break too many things. And believe me, I tried to break a lot of things, but eventually you'll need to do this. And so you ended up doing fixed scope, fixed quality, and one ends up doing is every project that you try to implement has an open time limit. This is a problem, right? Because what ends up happening is you're not able to close projects in time, and things start just accumulating on your end. And so just as a practical example, random example, let's pick up a very serious customer problem. So our customer is looking for savory meals with the regional twist. So this is the problem that we have. And this would be the way we would approach it in Scrum traditionally. So we're going to build the Infraspeak 𝗓𝗲𝗍, of course. And so I picked up a very serious scope that I did with my designers and with my engineering manager, where we have the ingredients that we need, the instruction with the various steps to assemble the 𝗓𝗲𝗍. Some people use beer, some others use vodka. I like you both, okay, no worries. And so you would do this, you would be very proud of what you did. It solves the problem perfectly. You would take it to your engineering team, and they will tell you, okay, this takes us 15 days, this takes us 10 days, this takes us whatever. You get a total of 35, and you're so happy because in 35 days, I'll have my 𝗓𝗲 to sell to my clients, right? We've all been there, right? What ends up happening 80% of the time? It's something like this, right? You figure out, oh, there's an extra scope that we didn't think about, so we also need to put that into the project. The sauce actually took me double the time because I didn't find the ingredients, and then they didn't mix, and then I burned it and I needed to do it again. We also had a critical bug that we needed to tackle, and so 3 more days on this. And what were 35 days actually ended up being 52 days. And what happened to me and to us as an organization was that at this moment, so you go to the 35 initially, you do one more week, and then you get to the point where your stakeholders are like, this is taking too long, right? They're getting, it's increasingly harder to keep the team on this scope. The return on investment you calculated is getting lower and lower because every day that the team spends on this, it's further effort. And everyone is getting frustrated, and you probably have to do something like this. You get into a meeting with engineering, and you say, guys, we need to wrap this up, so you got 1 more week, 2 more weeks to do it. And so I suggest we're not gonna gratinate our 𝗓𝗲𝗸𝗀, and we're not gonna do the serving, so whatever, right? Is this familiar? Everyone here already did 𝗓𝗲𝗸𝗀, so I guess so. And as you can see, for example, we spent so much time doing the sauce, it's like the main of the project, but in the end we needed to rush it, so we didn't actually present it or deliver the value, okay? And this was what happened in a lot of projects, and it frustrated us both product and engineering, because engineering is building something that has a beginning, middle, and end, but the end is cut short. And so the beginning and middle ends up being this kind of disjointed thing that maybe in the end doesn't make so much sense. And so we wanted to try to do something a little bit different, and that's when we came across 𝗬𝗂𝗶, which is kind of a way to twist the triangle around. And so for those of you who don't know, 𝗬𝗂𝗶 is something that Basecamp, which is this studio in the US invented, where, well, you can see the definition there. But basically, the emphasis in locking up the time frame, but keeping the scope flexible, okay? So going back to our triangle, now we say fixed time, fixed quality, I'm not gonna break stuff, but the scope is flexible, okay? I see a lot of confused faces, okay. And what this does is that when I have the scope being flexible, I need to be creative in how am I going to deliver the value that I'm looking for. And so usually in Scrum, we think about as the top one. So we're going to build a car, and I build the wheel, two wheels, then the chassis, and then I have a car. But what happens is, right, you only end up building this, maybe, and so the customer is upset because they don't really have a car that they can use. On 𝗬𝗂𝗶, we try to think about it in a different way, so it's the bottom one. We do an iteration, not good enough, we do another iteration, it's not good enough, and try to get to a point where we're not over-investing, but we also have the shortest version that we think is good enough. This image is from User Story Mapping, which is a brilliant book from Jeff Patton, if you want to check that out. And so we need to do two things. We need to understand what's the customer value, what the customer values, and how we can work with that. So for example, in this case, the two first versions is not enough, so I need to dedicate more time. The third version is acceptable, the fourth even better, and the 5 probably is an overkill, it's too much at this point. We also need to make sure that the appetite is well defined, and the appetite here is how much time do I want to invest in this thread. So from the beginning, I should have an idea how much time should I spend on this? And if I cannot deliver something reasonable in that amount of time, I don't even pick it up. Okay? In this case, for example, I'm willing to go until 3, but if I need to go until 4, maybe I'm picking up another topic. Okay? So going back to our francesinha, this will probably what we would do if we were to build a francesinha in shape-up. So sorry about that. Probably the sauce would be pre-made. I know this is a terrorist attack in Porto, but yeah. And so we'll buy it pre-made. We'll make sure that it works, and maybe in the future we do it in-house. But for now, it's good. And so the first scope would be mostly cut. It's just heat the sauce in a pot. Great. That only takes us 1 day. Let's identify a couple of things that are nice to have. So if we have time, we'll do it. But as you can see, like the 21 days gives you a lot of margin to go until the 35, or not if that's not necessary. Okay. And this is what happens. People here are the testimonials of this. That every scope that we introduce have midpoints that we can cut the project there. And that's really important in shape-up. So what happens with this new approach is that from the beginning, we have clear expectations of how much time we're going to spend here, normally 6 weeks. And we're going to discuss, this is what we're going to negotiate with engineering. So we're going to say, we have 6 weeks for this. What can you build for me? Instead of doing, I need to build this, how long do you think it will take? Okay, this is the framing of the conversation. Every unexpected event doesn't postpone the project. It should result in a negotiation of scope. So for example, if the sauce takes double the time, we maybe try to cut some part of the project from the beginning. And what ends up happening is that the timelines are more certain, which is amazing for external stakeholders, because they know when things are going to be ready, they can start communicating, everything flows better. Besides the fixing the time frame, ShapeUp also proposes other changes from what we did in Scrum. We prioritize asynchronous communication. This is something that we used to do before, so spend a lot of time in meetings, things that were not formally decided, so we ended up needing another meeting to make that decision. We do a lot of what is called the figuring things out, which is doing discovery of the technical complexity of features before starting them. And we also do a cool down to pay our technical debt. So getting into a little bit of detail in each of these topics. So as you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but so this is a thread on Basecamp, which is a software that we use to support this. And here we're discussing how the communication between the front end and the back end should happen. And so this is all documented by default, okay? And our way of operating is everything happens asynchronously, the decisions are saved. If we need, we go into a meeting and discuss things. But after you go into the meeting, then we write the decision down. And so as you can see, I'm putting here some steps, but it's the team without the product manager needing to go back and forth, making these decisions, discussing between themselves the best way to operate and taking decisions and keeping them safe. Which is very different from what I was used to, which is I would need to be actively going from person to person to decide stuff. Yeah. We also started development, as I was saying, with the figuring things out. What would happen before in Scrum? We have 6 weeks to do this. Day 1, let's start doing something. So pick up the first scope, start doing it. And what normally ends up happening in that stance is that by week 5 or 6, you figure out there was one thing that you should have done in the beginning that now will take you 2 extra weeks because you didn't do that in the beginning. And so what you see here, this is it's called the heel chart that Basecamp uses, which is basically giving a lot of emphasis to the left side here that you see, which is figuring out what are you going to do, which normally, if you look at Jira, they don't care. It's just like start doing stuff, right? And so our engineering team is very, our process for the engineering team is very focused in letting you spend time assessing the situation, understanding the complexities, figuring it out, how we're going to approach the problem solving. Okay? And then, as you see, the part of actually doing stuff is the easy part. Just go down. Also, another context, another concept that we introduce is what we call the cooldown in ShapeUp, which is after every development cycle, we stop and we do cleaning. And here the picture that I put is the dirty dishes, right? Every time you do a development cycle, you're getting dishes dirty from your francesinhas, and at some point the kitchen is packed, and so doing anything else is going to be really hard. This is something that, of course, everyone talks about, killing technical debt, but I think there's not a natural organization for that to happen in Scrum. And so what we do in ShapeUp is that we have 6 weeks for the cycle, development cycle, followed by 2 weeks of cooldown. So this gives us time to evaluate the bets that we have on the table, for the team to pay up this, can be experience, can be technical debt, and then prepare the following cycle. And so you do cycle, cooldown, cycle, cooldown. How did this impact our culture? So a lot of things. I picked up 3. We got into a rhythm. So the teams got into a rhythm, which is very different from, we used to get in a rut. So a project would just keep on going, and you're there, and you don't really know what's happening as a PM, and and everyone starts getting frustrated. Since you have the fixed amount of time, after 6 weeks, something needs to be shipped. Doesn't mean that I need to send it to the client, just whatever it is. But at least the aim is to have something that is production ready. We focus more on the good enough solution because the trade-off is more practical. In Scrum, since you don't have a hard deadline, you don't really think too much about it. Let's see how it goes. Here, we're already seeing the finish line. It's 6 weeks. It's quite a few weeks, but it's down there, so you need to think about it. And something that I'm really proud of, and I don't know if there's someone from engineering here. Rafa went away already. But the fear that we had that, like, okay, the PM that is always on top of everything and needs to be concerned and needs to be the only accountable for the projects and etc. What actually happened is our engineering team stepped up in accountability. And actually now they are the first ones concerned about a deadline being missed because we made it an important thing. That's the target of the project. Yeah, okay. So I went into much detail. Now I have to get back. Yeah, but it actually applies to everything. So we're always moving. We're always looking at the next thread. We're always trying to iterate on the next cycle. So we're not stopped in just one topic. We don't spend too much time on one thing trying to make it perfect. We try to make it good enough. The team, everyone steps up, which is great for the product manager because they can move on and talk to clients and do all the important things that we say we need to do and then we don't. So how did we start this process and how you can try and start it in your own companies, I hope. Yeah, it's kind of a cliche, but start small and grow from there. We started 2 years and something ago, just one squad, because they were very keen on trying it. They wanted to work asynchronous. And so the easiest way for you to try something like this, any of these concepts, but the ShapeUp itself, convince your engineering manager or your whatever it is to experiment with one squad. Convince them that this is a good idea. You'll try it for one cycle. And what happened in our case is that people don't want to move on from it. They really want to do it. They tell other teams. The other teams also want to jump in. And now I think we have it in, let's say, 7 or 8 teams already. Some teams still do Kanban, the mobile team especially. But the wins that you have will then leverage the next teams that you need to get into the motion. That was it. That's what I was going to share with you. Thank you a lot. We're hiring, so if you want to join us, this seems interesting, please do. And I think now go for the Q&A and hear from you too. Thank you. We need them. I think it's for the. Yeah, we can. Oh, you can. I got a glass of water. Obrigado.
All right, so we're going to have around 10 minutes.
Should we sit or we?
Oh, yeah.
For David specifically, for both of them, and get both of your perspective on something. So, yeah.
Everyone's very shy.
Check. Yes. Check. Is it working? Yeah.
I would like to understand how you manage the engineering teams.
Okay, so maybe I wasn't clear on that. They don't have direct contact with clients. What happened was instead of us spending a lot of time in the development process, so going to every stand-up, being inside the scope, doing all the ceremonies, etc. Our work with the team is much more high level during the cycles. So if they have doubts, they come to us. We help them figuring it out. And the effect that this has is that it frees up our time to dedicate to, and we see the product manager function closer to the revenue teams and to the go-to-market teams, because we have this. We know that the engineering teams are gonna pick up the slack that we left behind. You a question, I can do like a little interview. It was super interesting because what I did today when I arrived was I shook everyone's hands. I don't come to the office often, so maybe that's why. But I took the time to go around, shake everyone's hand. I was the family, I was good, and then eventually I got to my desk.
And that to be very common at my office here in Portugal and Porto, but I think it's great. I just think it takes a different mindset. I mean, one thing that happened that I cut for time out of the presentation was when I first moved to Porto. I had come from Berlin, of course, where basically nobody greets anybody, especially on the street or in like just a public situation. It's really nice. I was pleasantly surprised by the friendliness here and everyone wanting to connect. But I remember getting on the elevator. This is in like my second week or third week in the country, and I just had my AirPods in. I was just listening to music, just whatever, and goes up a floor or two in the short-term place I was staying before getting the apartment, and the door opens and a couple comes in, and the guy says something, but I assume they were just talking to each other. Again, I'm like zoned out. I'm just listening to music. And after, the door closes, it goes up another floor. So the guy turns to me, he just starts like basically yelling at me. I was like, what is there something wrong? Like, what's like trying to also make it clear that I was new there. And then he just was like, oh, well, here in Portugal, you need to, give the greeting to anybody that gets in and out of the elevator. And I was like, that was the craziest culture shock I think I've ever had. Or it was like a lesson in Portuguese politeness, and I never forgot it. I can put it that way. So
I don't know.
Some people say he had some issues, maybe, but still, I found it.
I don't think I greet strangers in the elevator like, hello.
Very ironic, but yeah, I learned a lesson that day. So that was my first introduction to Portuguese culture, I guess.
Is it the same thing
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think the reality is that we have to think, as we were even talking before the presentations, that we have to think in sort of a remote first way, right? Like we kind of have to approach it as, I think, bringing the same intention, bringing the same type of cultural understanding to even online interactions. Now, it's going to be more difficult, and you know, maybe you can't do it as effectively, but I think the things that you can do in terms of, again, approaching it maybe with curiosity, trying to understand their culture, maybe explaining. I mean, what I find, for example, it's not necessarily remote, but I try to explain to people in the workplace that I'm meeting for the first time, well, I come from an American culture. Sometimes we can be more direct, but like I try to be upfront about it, right? Like, I mean, of course, I try to like adjust to the culture of the place that I'm in or the people that I'm working with. But I think it's better to approach it that way as opposed to, well, it's online, whatever. Actually, I think maybe some of those things can be transmitted, maybe not more effectively online, but like, let's say equally as much. Because you know, it's even harder to pick up some of those cues. So I think maybe you need to be more sensitive to it. But I would say, you know, maybe do the best that you can in the situation that you're in, but also recognizing that you may indeed get an opportunity to meet them in person in the future. Maybe you can do more at that point, but you might as well have tried to build the bridge and the foundation initially. And then you can go for Francisina.
Yeah, something interesting that I learned. So I live in Lisbon, so I come to the office maybe once a quarter or something like that. And what I learned is that I take the time at the office just to build relationships. So since I'm not here for a while, then the day is just like shaking hands, how's it going, let's catch up. Because there's so much, you know, backlog from things that don't happen when you're here at the office, and so I understand that, and even the body language, you cannot really come that across, and in the office is totally different.
That's also why it's important to build those relationships in person as soon as you can, to be able to like, I think that can go a long way to like smoothing the communication and getting people to help you out with something as opposed to just like a random Slack message from some guy across the company. Like it can be good to actually build that bridge first and then leverage that in an online context if possible. All of that because it was later like also felt the same similar difference when it comes to customer relationship, like companies would approach customer relations, you could talk to you. Felt like or you had to kind of adapt to your work environment, but also the way business is done there. Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I've experienced that as salespeople trying to sell to me, and at the same time, I don't have a sales background, but I've done that in my own business, but also just in having those conversations with customers as well. So I do think it's important to keep that in mind, to try to adjust on that level. I think what was challenging in a number of those environments, because they were so international, so multicultural, is that not only would you get to, for example, some of the companies I worked for in Germany, where it's 200, 300 people, but 50 nationalities. So actually the number of Germans at some of those companies I worked for, like we went around at one point, like the product managers, and we were trying to think across the company, counting like maybe on two hands how many Germans that we knew that were actually at the company, that it's a German company. So when you're dealing with that, you have to like deal with it internally. You have to deal with it. I've been like, for example, when I worked at 𝗂𝗃s, I was working on a global team. So we had foreigners and Japanese people in the small office that we were working in. But then I was working with teams in, you know, in Europe, near Amsterdam, in Australia, and so on across the world. So I think ultimately the challenge is like trying to be conscious of the way that you're communicating, thinking about the person you're talking to, but having to do that so many times per day in so many different contexts. It's not easy, but I think it's important just to even have that voice a little bit in the back of your mind, not in an anxiety-inducing, paralyzing, paranoid way, but more like a, you know, let me like, just remember that, because I think it's very easy to forget it, and then we just bulldoze ahead using the same strategies that we've used in other contexts, and it may not be as effective.
That's necessarily somebody that inside somewhere just thought of it.
Yeah.
How you figure that out? Going to a German company
Yeah.
that's Germans, probably better go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going to national, got 50,000 very proportion.
Right.
You have to pick it up on the fly. So.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I think the best approach is to be direct. Doesn't mean to be aggressive or mean or harsh, but more saying what you mean and trying to get that from the other side. Now, whether or not they give that to you might be a different story. But I think it also then comes down to sort of like person to person. So are you talking to your German colleague? Are you talking to your Indian colleague, American colleague, and so forth? Well, I think the culture map is more about the overall culture of a given country, the people from that country. So I think it's good to keep that in mind, but it probably, of course, you could say, well, you know, I'm an American, I talk to another American, it's going to be, you know, we have the same culture. Well, maybe not, right? We're from different parts of the country, we have different backgrounds, so on and so forth. So obviously you have to like use it with judgment. It's not really a blanket thing, but more keeping it in mind as opposed to just going in with only what you know and have expected from your home, you know, country or culture that you're brought up in.
And it's always constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
Every decision that you take in your day-to-day is influencing the company culture, even if it's just slightly. As a product manager, if you go into a pitch session with your engineering team and you're not willing to take questions, it's like, this is the way that I do it, then you're imposing like a top-down culture. Maybe it doesn't work for you, but so you also should be mindful of the culture that you are imposing, because if people see you one way, they will treat you one way. If you want to have, for example, a collaborative environment, then you should also reinforce that. Go out of your way to compliment people that take good actions. And yeah, yeah, of course. As you more people enter the company, they will influence the culture, and teams start developing different cultures, different departments.
I would answer that just by saying, kind of going back to this idea of listening first and then acting, is I wouldn't come in just doing the thing the way that I want to do. I mean, hopefully through the interview and hiring process, there's some understanding. I mean, you can only get so much, of course, but hopefully there's some buy-in that you fit the culture, or that, you know, the culture fits you. But then at that point, obviously, once you get deeper into it, I think it's, I mean, I prefer to work with people who don't come in and just say, oh, we're doing it my way, you know? And it's more like listening first, seeing how it goes, and then learning how to interact and navigate within that culture. Yeah. I mean, one thing I found really interesting just to say is, like, you think, okay, I'm going to be in Japan, I'm going to work for, you know, think of any Adobe or whatever, any Silicon Valley company. But even if they have a huge office in the middle of Tokyo, it's typically full of Japanese people. And therefore, even if it's got this like Silicon Valley heart to it or whatever, the reality is on the ground in a specific office, it's probably going to take some elements of the local culture. So I found that sort of relationship between, I mean, ultimately it's like who's actually working there. It may not come from, they might have the founding myth or the origin from Silicon Valley or whatever place, could be Porto, but then who's actually working in the office, and you have to be able to navigate the politics to that extent. So unless you're the CEO wanting to come in and just like iron fist it, then yeah. Well, I think it probably starts with what they want, and then with the one person, and then they hire more people. And again, like these German companies I worked for, if they have 50 nationalities and 200 people, and they have a couple people, let's say on average, from each of the nationalities, I mean, at that point, I mean, it does become emergent. Of course, you can't like control it, but you have your values and, you know, the mission, the values, and all that. Mhm.
But as a CEO, you'll have a lot of say in the culture, in the sense that you have a lot of exposure, so people will look at your behaviors and understand what is valued, how to be successful in a company. So if you're someone that in your all hands or whatever just says, we're only interested in money, 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 of course, people will just care about that. For example, projects that are about killing tech debt will not even come up in the conversation, right? So if you have more exposure, and product managers generally should have a lot of exposure to the company, these people can also influence more of the culture than, for example, an engineer which is just in his squad and has low exposure to the company.
Maybe like you identify now, looking back, the drawbacks, because we know everything is a compromise. We sometimes say the drawbacks that you have.
Yeah, I think something that we're experiencing as a team is that the cadence sometimes makes us rush a little bit things, because you're in that cycle of like, okay, 6 weeks, and then I stop, and then I need to deliver the next cycle, and then I stop. Sometimes you would like to have another week to think about it, make it more mature. I can understand that. I still think the trade-off is positive towards you deliver something, even if it's a little bit raw, you figure out together with the team if you need to come back to it later, versus maybe taking that week extra, doing an overkill of a solution, and then the team is 1 week later to get to the objective. Something that I think I missed that I wanted to come across is that in a year or in 2 years or whatever you settle as a roadmap goal, you can only solve a certain number of problems. So every week that you think, okay, let's just think about this 1 more week, let's just spend 1 more week developing this, let's just test it 1 more week before we open it to clients. This amounts to a lot of time during a course of a year, for example. And so instead of solving 20 customer problems, now you're only solving 15 or you're solving 12. And so either you're very certain of the problems that you're solving, or you're probably gonna end the year without solving a lot of the important issues for the client. All right, thank you.
Thank you.